Hi there everyone. I've been on vacation this week, so this tutorial is going to be a little bit quicker than normal. It's going to be in pops, particularly looking at how to use the pattern pop to make some really cool effects. I've been by the sea, so I've got really into things living in tide pools, particularly things like sea slugs. So this is something that I've been trying to recreate visually through TouchDesigner code. Let's see if we can find one moving. Colorful things globbing along, essentially. I've also been making other things inspired by the sea. So there's this network, which I just have a video output of right now, which I will be making a tutorial of later in the next week or so, and will be available to Patreon subscribers before coming to YouTube. So sign up there if you're interested in seeing how to make some frondy, wobbly things. Plus I've added in attractors, and a future iteration has these sea slugs manipulating these little fronds as well. Anyway, I'm going to delete all of this and start from scratch. The first thing I'm going to do is create a noise chop, and this is going to be what drives my position. I'm going to turn time slice on, so we just get this single moving value. And in channel, I want to create 3 channels, X, Y, and Z. I'm going to drag this out to a trail. And because this is going to store my position, I'll create a null and call it pos. From here, we're going to move to a pop to, so chop to pop. And here, kind of like if we move this into stops, we have a visual. We have a line moving in 3D space representing our position. I'm going to view this just so I can tweak some values here. And I'm going to move my noise period up to like probably about 5. We want something a bit smoother. And I'll move around the amplitude later when I have a better idea of what kind of space I want this to traverse. So this is the first thing that I want to do. In terms of actually adding some kind of wider flesh to this, I'm going to take a piece of geometry, in this case a sphere. I'm going to turn down that frequency to 2, and I'm going to drag it into a copy. I'm also going to turn down the uniform scale of the sphere to like 0.1. So now we have a sphere that is being dragged along, extruded, so to speak. It will get a little bit neater maybe if we bring up that frequency to like 3 or 4. And so then we get this sort of tube. Another option, which I'll talk about in a subsequent tutorial, is how to take a circle and essentially rotate that around the central point of a line. And this essentially allows you to have lots and lots of circles that you can then mesh together using a skin or something like that. So let's just quickly look at what that might look like. Turn radius or uniform scale down. Let's look at it at a different plane. So right now we can see this is basically only rotated towards us. What we would need to do in this situation is actually rotate it so it rotates around the line, so we can actually like mesh it. But eventually we would then add in a skin, and that skin would essentially make a tube, and it's going to look very similar to this circle, but using less geometry. Anyway, for now we're going to stick with this sphere. So we've got this sphere, and the next thing that we want to do is we want to create some kind of line that's going to go and become our fins. Basically, we're creating some underwater sea creature, so it's going to have this as its body moving, and then it's going to have a fin or a kind of little wavy thing on either side that's going to move with it. So what I'm going to do here is I want my line to go to the side, so actually like this. And let's say I only want it to be like 0.3 long. And because I want 2, I'm going to do one that's in reverse here. And so a lot of what we're doing today is we're going to work with the copy pop and also the pattern pop, which I'll bring in later to show you how we can make some interesting effects. Okay, let's again bring this into a copy. We're going to copy here. And now we can see that we have this sort of line. We have this sort of line moving, but we don't really have any rotation on it yet. So something I find really useful in our copy pops is that we have these template transformations. So I could turn on this template rotate and I could add in something that's going to rotate. Right now we just have our position, so it's not going to do a lot. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add in a custom bit of code that I made to get that rotation around the line, kind of similar to what we would do to orient those circles around the line. So it's going to be in my chops, and I have called it fin rotation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in to my 2D. I'll also pop it into a trail, so I match this length and merge together. So we have X, Y, Z, RX, RY, RZ. And what's happening here, and I'll copy this into the YouTube comments, is I've basically made a custom component that takes my position and performs yaw and roll rotations. So this is going to be added in. So we've got X, Y, Z, RX, RY, RZ. This is going to be added into my component here. Let's make sure it's coming through as a new attribute. I'm going to select RX, RY, and RZ, and I'm going to call this rot. And we want it to be a float with 3 components. In my copy, let's go back to this template rotate and select rot. So now we have a better orientation of that line around the central point. We can see it's curving a bit more nicely. I'm not going to worry too much about getting this really, really perfect, because what I actually want to do is I want to add in a pattern. And the pattern is going to sort of modulate that line over time. So I'm going to add the pattern in between my position, my chop 2. I'll just call it line pos. And I'll add in a pattern. And what we'll see when I add in that pattern is it's going to create this sort of sine wave thing. And what we actually want to do, because this is actually replacing our position, because we can see our output attribute scope, what we actually want to do is go to rotation, and we don't want it to be set, we want actually to add. So if I go 0, 0, 0, and do my combine attribute scope as rotation and output attribute scope as rotation, we should have the same output, and we can now start adding to it. So let's see what happens if I add a sine. Let's change up these values a bit as well. So we can see as we start adding to that, it gets a bit more funky. So we actually don't really want to add anything except to the Z axis, because that's going to be sort of that flipping up and down, making that sort of modulation. In a way, it might be easier if the line was nice and straight right now, but we'll do the best with this. And what I'm going to do, I want to do, say, 3 cycles, so we can see that it's moving. And I also want to modulate that phase, so I'll do abs time dot seconds times 0.1. So now we should be able to see that phase moving through. If I switched it to something like a triangle, or even a square, we're going to see a more pronounced version of that. Not something that we actually want, but you could get kind of creative with these types of controls. If you really wanted to, you could go in and add in a cosine. Let's do like 180. Could do a different multiplier there to sort of even it out. and this will just be at 0. So we have this this funky thing that's going through the side. You could also scale this down if you don't want it to be quite so pronounced on that sort of sideways wobbly modulation. This is great. This is giving us a much more dynamic, wavy line that sort of looks like an animal in motion. I'm going to neaten that up, and then obviously we're going to copy this and do exactly the same thing for this other line. So if we merge together, we should see that we have this line going in two directions. Something we could do is we could actually flip around this pattern here and actually kind of go the other way. We could also go and do kind of reversals here. So then we have something that is going to be a bit more sort of unique on either side. If you want to maneuver these lines so that they're not both kind of starting in the center, and this is okay right now because we're going to cover this up, you could then set an offset here. And then these lines are kind of not quite touching. There's kind of a gap in between, but you can see how they align. So this is the outer edge of that shape. Right now I will just remove this and go back to having everything kind of connected together. That should be at 0.3, not 1. Okay, perfect. And now if I really wanted to, I could merge in this other shape. So right now we can see how we have this sort of shape that's moving up and down. What I would like to do here though is I'd like to add in another pattern, and this is kind of why I was mentioning this tutorial is all about how to use the pattern shop for various parameter changes. So the parameter I want to change here is going to be just I'm just going to actually create a new parameter. I'm going to call it size. So P is still going to be active. And I'm doing a set here, so size is just going to be my output that I'm setting here. Right now size is set to ramp, so it's going to go up from 0 to 1. So if I go to my template attribute, turn on scale, and look at size, we should see that it's going to get smaller as we go through the shape. So that's something that we could do, but I actually want to use ease in and ease out. Actually, let's do an ease in. And I want to animate that with abs times dot seconds times 0.1. And I'm actually going to select ease up, ease down, so then we get this sort of blobby moving motion that flips around as we go through, which I really like. Get these sort of sea sluggy kind of motions here. If you wanted to, you could also apply some kind of scale to these fins. I haven't done that in the original, but that could be kind of nice. So actually let's try that real quick. In the copy, could do scale. Rote's going to be really big, so we actually probably have to create some additional patterns here, chaining these together. Maybe there's a more elegant way of doing this. I'll call this size, and we could use the same size for both. So size, and let's do something like just a sign, just to keep it simple. And we'll set our size there so we can kind of see it moving around. And let's just add in, or I could merge those together, but let's just add in this pattern as well and create a size here. So it potentially could be streamlined a little bit, but this is sort of the methodology of working with these patterns. I'm going to set a sign. So then we get that sort of control there. If we upped the number of cycles, we can kind of see how things come in and come out. And if you want to, which I think is always a nice thing, is just do a nice old abstime.seconds and copy that, just so that you get like a little bit of dynamic motion as you go through the animation here. So let's see what's going on here. That's looking pretty nice. Just going to make sure that everything's attached to scale here for the size even. In the pattern I might actually even maneuver this down a little bit. So 0 to 0.4, or actually 0.3 to 0.6, just so that scale's a bit smaller. Okay, that's looking really nice. For this blobby, I'm also going to just move down my sphere position just a little tiny bit to 0.075, just so, or even actually 0.05, so things kind of just map to the outside a little bit better. Okay, I'm liking that. The final thing we're going to do here before we start to add attractors is we're going to add in a color. And so again, we're going to use pattern, lots of patterns. And in pattern, I'm going to do set, in caps, I'm going to call it color. And this is going to give me a parameter size of 3 automatically, but I want a parameter size of 4. And this is so I can actually stamp that color onto my geometry here. So I'm going to go to template attributes, use template point attributes, and these are only going to be a small set of things. These are the attributes we've created. I want to use color. And it's important that we, or as far as I have found, it's important that we use the terminology color here, because if I just say col and put in col, it's not giving me that color attribute. So it's kind of just important to keep that naming convention relatively similar for if we're feeding that through. So what we want to do is just play around with some of these functionalities to see what kind of colors we can get. So we could do a sine. Let's do a cosine to mix it up. Adding in a triangle perhaps. And let's go in to the phase of this triangle and change that. So we can see that that is now sort of moving over time. You could go in and be more creative with these types of color changes. You could add in something like an LFO to make it more kind of interesting and dynamic. But this is sort of what I'm working with. I might even do a ramp here just to show it going through. Okay, I quite like that. I think that's going to look really nice. And I'm just going to copy this into here, add that in. And if someone knows of a way to basically chain pattern chops or pattern pops without having to make multiple versions of the pattern pop, kind of like in math mix where we can create multiple operations, that would be really great, because obviously it does get a bit convoluted when we have all these things. In this second set of fins, I'm going to go again to template attributes, color. And so that should be the same. Obviously you could make it so the fins on each side are sort of different. And finally, I want to go in here to my, I want to go in here to my spherical position, add in a pattern. I'm going to say set color again. Again, we're going to change that parameter size to 4 because color's going to want us to have an alpha, and now we can see that this is all kind of coming through. What we want to do here is I'm going to say, let's do the ease in Let's do a ramp, and let's do a sign. And I'll start animating these. You can really put in any values that you want. And obviously just make sure that that logic is going in spelled correctly. Maybe a sign there actually. So that's kind of nice, but I'll slow that down a little bit. And let's try that ramp again. The ramp will basically move that color through. We can see it's kind of going from the top to the bottom, which could be a nice effect. Let's see how that manifests here when we actually apply it. Yeah, see, I don't really like that because it's sort of too blocky. So what I'm going to go in and do is go back to that pattern, and it might be useful to label these things. So yeah, I'll do cosine. So it sort of more fades in and out, and I quite like that sort of color palette. You could play around a little bit to make sort of the very light colors or the very dark colors a bit brighter, so you see them more, but that's also partially the size. We're going quite small, so you could play around with these to make it so it actually is always visible. But I quite like this as it is. So basically what we've done here is we've created this sort of wormy objecty thing through using our pattern. Let's home that. So we've used noise and basically patterns to create this sort of sea sluggy wormy thing. Merge is great for these two, but I'm going to take this out for now, and we're going to create two separate geos. So geo1 is going to be fins, and geo2 is going to be body. We're going to set up a camera. Later on I might switch this out for a camera from my toolbox so I can actually maneuver using my mouse interaction, but for now we'll stick with this camera. I'm going to make a render, not a remap. And we're also going to create some textures and potentially a light. So I'm going to do just a font for the body and a constant for the fins. Okay, so we've got the fins right there, and then we just need to add in a light for our body. Okay, looking good. An RGB key, and finally an out. I'm going to split my screen using option left square bracket, and then I'm going to do option 2 to turn this into my panel viewer. You know what, I'm actually going to bring in a camera viewport, so I'm going to go to Tools, Camera Viewport. I'm going to replace this in my render with the camera viewport. I'm also going to set this up so I can control my panel. So that's pretty good. And right now this is at 1280 by 720. The scaling is looking a little off here. So 1280 by 720. There we go. And now we have a nice resolution. So I've also turned on my middle and right mouse. I was already using this before I deleted everything, so the panel's set up a little bit differently than it will be by default. So here we go. Here is our sort of sea slug. I'm going to play around with the lighting a little bit. So I'm going to go in and maneuver the light around. And I also kind of like to add in a small ambient light as well and just have it at a low level. So I'm turning down that on the dimmer. So then you always get a bit of light kind of coming through. And so this is starting to look really nice and shiny and iridescent. What we want to do is basically do some post-processing on the fins and the body separately. Yeah, so we're going to rename these as fins and body. And so for this, we're going to just select fin geo, and for this we'll just take our body geo. So now these are separate. What we're going to do is apply blooms to these. So let's start off with the body. Looking good. I'm always kind of just like moving around stuff, feeling it out with the blooms. Often it's a little bit random, but I'm going to turn down this pre-black level. Maneuver the gamma down a little bit, pre-brightness up a tiny bit, bloom intensity, we don't want it too much. We just want to add a bit of sort of extra glow. Bloom radius kind of around here. It's obviously going to change a little bit as well. We have different kind of colors coming through. Turn down that threshold. You could have it make more of a sort of a wash, but I want it sort of more muted. I mean, the wash is quite nice. So there we go. And now let's do a comp. Combine these. And let's just do an over. So that's already looking quite good. But what I want to do here is I want to add more of a glow as well to these fins. So again, I'll do a bloom. I'll just go a little bit less hard on the bloom here. So let's turn down that pre-black level. Let's fiddle around with this. Also just gonna, for the time being, visualize the fins solo. Bloom threshold. Move that S-curve, and for me, because I'm sort of just randomly or almost moving things in a vibe-like way until I find something I like, I quite like to select from my output here just bloom, so I can see exactly what is happening. If you have a lower bloom radius, you're going to get more of your detail, which looks kind of nice. And that bloom threshold's about how much is kind of going to get let through. Obviously, bloom intensity you can sort of turn up or turn down. Bloom of alpha, but we want input plus bloom. That intensity is a little bit high. Let's see what that looks like comped together. That's really nice. Loving that. And also, I want the fins to be a bit more prominent. So what I'm actually going to do is go in here and do like 0.5. And 0.5, although it should probably be minus 0.5. There we go. Is that too much fin now? Maybe let's meet in the middle with 0.4 and minus 0.4. I'm liking that. Finally, I want to just flip this orientation around. The fins are kind of over the body, so I want to flip this. We can either just do swap operation order, or we could go to under. So there's under. If we keep it on over, we can just swap that operation order and just move that layer underneath. So I like this much better. So these are the basics of creating this sort of sea slug effect using the pattern and copy elements to create something that is really just using kind of geometrical functions to move around. And it looks kind of nice and fluid, and I'm already kind of into it. The final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a bunch of particles and use the attractor that we built in a previous tutorial to bring this all together. This is the tutorial that I previously made on how to make an attractor using pops in TouchDesigner. And what we're going to do is we're not going to rebuild this from scratch. We're going to take the component which I've kind of built out of this. That's essentially a drag and drop component that you can use whenever you need an attractor in your work. Obviously, you can build the attractor component yourself from that tutorial. The component itself is going to be available on my Patreon for anyone that wants to go ahead and download it and just have it as this drag and drop attractor that can be brought in. I'm going to bring it in. As I said, this will be on my Patreon for anyone that wants to use it. And what we're going to do here is bring in a point generator, because we're going to generate a whole ton of points. I'm going to do a box. So we can see here we've got lots of points distributed in the volume of a box. And I'm going to move this down to like 2,000 points. I don't want a crazy large number. This can go directly into that attractor component. And if I double click, we're going to see that we have this select here. So this select basically can be used to select the chop that we're using to drive position. This is going to be basically where our attractor is within that particle system. So it's here. Let's bring that up so we can see it. Go into the attractor in select. Let's go to chops and do parent2.op noise 1. So now it should be selected. That's going to feed into this math mix with this position here. And obviously we've set up all our parameters as we did in that tutorial. If you want to look at that more in depth, we have this weight parameter here that we can manipulate. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, so we can see that attractor is working. Let's bring it out into a geo, and we can manipulate it a little better in a minute. I'm going to add in another render. And this one's going to render particles. Switch to camera viewport. Right particles. Okay. Again, we would need to bring that into our network here. So we can see that the particles are now added to that network. They're just kind of all being pulled by that front point. So we need to play with those attraction levels a little bit. Okay, so first thing to do here is I want to move my size up to like 5. Let's zoom out. Maybe let's do it to 3. And obviously you can have it be not completely square. You can kind of play with that. And let's go into the attractor and see what we can do here to sort of even it out a little bit. So for this field, I'm going to turn down the radius to like 0.5. So that's feeling a bit better. So things sort of will pull as they move kind of towards there. We can change this transition range so you can have it be more sort of not blurry, but sort of more eased in and out. And you can play with the transition align as well. So this is kind of going to allow you to play a bit with that weight. And then also we have this math here as well, so you can choose how aggressive that is, or if you're moving towards or away. But let's do something like 1, and let's see what happens there. I like that. Maybe a smaller radius. And maybe we'll see better how many points are being moved if we just turn up this point generator back up to 10,000. Very nice. One of the things that's going to happen here is that basically the points are going to be affected and then they're just going to pop back to their positions when that attractor is away. So what we could actually do is we could add in a feedback loop and we could see what happens as we just displace those and those displacements stay kind of continually. So we see how we're kind of carving out this section as things get pulled towards our attractor point. So this is okay, but what we actually want to do is have a method of sort of pulling back those particles just after a bit more time than what was initially happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a math mix. And this is one of my favorite sort of tools within the new pops. And I'm going to put this in here, my original particles, and I'm going to say mix A, B, C. So I'll do P, and then in 1P. And then here we can just put a amount, and this is sort of how much we want to mix between the two. So if I do 0, it's going to be the same as before. So basically we're going to be just taking this feedback loop and displacing those particles. But if I do something like 0.5, or maybe even 0.3, we're going to see how we pull those particles, but then they sort of bounce back a bit more slowly. And let's go and make some more attractor tweaks. There we go, we kind of like that. Let's change that math to like 0.25. There we go, minus 0.25, and have them kind of push away. So here we're creating this sort of push-pull dynamic. Let's even turn that up to make it a bit more obvious as we move through. And again, if I switch this math mix to absolutely 0, we'll see how things are just kind of pushed away indefinitely, although it's kind of hard to see of all these particles. But if I do like 0.1, we'll see how things slowly move back to their positions. They don't just jump back. And what we can also do is add in a little bit of noise here, just to modulate that. I feel like I've used abstime.seconds like a million times in this tutorial. It's a bit fast, so let's do it at 0.01. There you go. So now we have this sort of sea slug that's in a sea of particles that are being pushed away from it. You could automate that weight in your attractor and have things sort of push and pull. But for now, it's just going to sort of make this little push away. And it's just going to be at the head of the organism. The next steps, and this is going to be what I'll share with you guys on Patreon, is making something that has multiple sea creatures and using multiple attractors. So this is going to show you how to chain multiple attractors together, which is a question I get quite a lot, and put these things in kind of 3D space whilst also working with these attractors. And I've kind of spent a bit of time setting these attractors to do a bit more of the push and pull methodology that I want. Also, you can see these particles have sometimes little trails here as they get pulled. And this is basically, I'm doing a sort of a particle segmentation. So when an effect happens on a specific particle, like when it moves from its original position, it's gonna be put into a grouping of particles that will automatically have a trail. So this is also a nice way of looking at how to maybe create trails on only specific objects within a particle system, kind of segmenting things. And yeah, this has been an effect I've kind of enjoyed making. And there's definitely things that could be streamlined, but overall I really like the effect, and it runs pretty fast on my computer. I'm running 2 and 60 FPS for both. Again, as I've said a million times, like certain elements of these are going to be on the Patreon. So for paid Patreon subscribers, this is going to be available for you with the three sea slugs. For folks who don't want to remake that attractor from the tutorial, it's also going to have the attractor component that will be available on the Patreon as well, that you can just drag and drop into your projects. And this obviously is not just useful for this, you can use it for any project where you want to add some kind of attraction. That is the tutorial for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more. I'm going to be back from vacation next week and making lots more tutorials.